All right. So, hi guys. I hope you're all safe and doing well. My name is Arjun. I work as a consultant for Learnovators. It's an e-learning based company in Chennai. So, the topic of my session today is ML Ops, machine learning operations, and it's all about taking your experimentation in ML to production. How do you serve it to users, right? So before we get started, I think Hitesh will be sharing you a feedback form for this session as well. So if you have any questions, share it in the chat as well. Try to fill this form. So I also have a QR code here on the screen. If you want, you can scan. So starting with the session, just to give you some context here, think about how software has been being made in the past. In the early days of Linux, when the Linux kernel team was developing the software, what they were doing is they were literally sharing patches of software by email to each other. So that is how difficult it was to collaborate in teams. Later on, this very same team, they started trying to solve this problem by themselves, and they built Git that we all use today. Git is a source control software, and it allows us to do a lot of things. It helps us simultaneously work on same code base. It helps us manage different versions and manage releases. It helps us maintain branches of features and release hot fixes for your projects. Now, fast forwarding to today, we have something called DevOps. It's very popular and it's a set of practices that help software developers and operations team come together. So while it used to take months and months to make a new release, today it takes only a few seconds for a software company to make a new release and roll it out. And that's what DevOps has enabled us today. So this is possible due to a lot of things. So there is something called continuous integration, continuous deployment. So all you need to do is make a single commit to your repository and everything from running your project against a lot of test cases, deploying it on your infrastructure, no matter how many servers it's running on. All this happens automatically, even security checks and all these things. So, how is this all related to machine learning? That's what we'll be seeing. So, similar to this journey that software development has been through in the past, we are going to through the same journey with machine learning. It's a very early field, and so that's what we'll be looking at today. A quick history lesson. Though learning has been here for a long time, so if you look at the timeline for the ML research, in 1951 we had the first neural network, the first research paper on neural networks. Backpropagation, it's something that we use in deep learning when we have multiple layers of neural networks. That was proposed in 1970, and again in 1986 we had Geoffrey Hinton, who we call the godfather of deep learning. He put forward his paper, he and his team, about backpropagation and a lot of experiments with that. Things like LSTM, support vector machines, all these came in 1990s. So obviously, machine learning has been here for a long time, right? But only recently have we started operationalizing machine learning, right? So everything required to commercialize the outcome of deep learning and machine learning, things like compute power, GPUs, all these things are only available now at a price that is commercializable, right? One more thing is today machine learning is accelerated by chips built specifically for machine learning. So these chips are specifically designed to accelerate matrix multiplication, which is very important for deep learning. So those kind of chips are also in production today, and that's what helps us accelerate ML in production today, right? So that is what has changed, and that is why operationalizing machine learning is a very new field, right? And the tooling and processes required to allow us to take machine learning to production is still at its very early stage. And so the processes required to do that are still not well established. So that is the premise for today's session. I just wanted you to know that what I'm going to present is not the best practice, but the current state of the industry right now. So the reason why I chose this topic was that whenever you think about machine learning, what do you think of? Let's just try this experiment. use the chat section and tell me what you think of when you hear machine learning. I'll just wait. I have a tab on the chat as well. I'm sure a lot of you have been experimenting with ML. A lot of data scientists, aspiring data scientists in the group. So, what do you guys think of first when you think about when you hear the word machine learning? Learns itself through data. That's right. Taking decisions without explicitly programmed. Yeah. So that's the gist of it. So if you think about the process of building a model, that's what comes to my mind when I think about machine learning. You start from raw data, so it's data from a lot of sources, heterogeneous sources, and first you do a lot of analysis on this data. So you try to understand what is the form and shape of this data set. Then you start cleaning the data set, because there are usually when you have a data set, it's not as clean as what you get out of Kaggle. So when you actually work on real life projects, there are a lot of missing values, there are a lot of values that are invalid, and so you have to fix all these things manually. And then there is feature engineering, feature extraction, a lot of data science that comes into understanding the data set and pre-processing it. Once you do have a usable data set, what you do is the machine learning researchers and the data scientists, they come in and experiment on this data set. So they try to build models, they try to come up with new model architectures and parameters so that they can build the right model that has the optimum performance. Then you start testing this model. You try to give data that it hasn't seen before and see what is the accuracy, what are the loss, and all these metrics, and make sure that it's performing well when it looks at data that it hasn't seen before. So this is an iterative process, right? You look at data, you build a model, you test it, and you keep doing this till you have a model that has good performance. And the outcome is what we've been calling model. It's a set of weights that define what this model represents, what this model has learned. So this is what most people think of when they hear machine learning. They think about building a model. So if you take any course about machine learning, if you read any books about machine learning or any research paper that comes out, they're mostly about this process, whatever fits into this box. But when you look at the big picture, it happens so that this machine learning code, building machine learning model, happens to be a very small part of the whole process. And the real challenge is, how do you take this model into production? How do you serve it to users? Once you do have a model, how do you take the output of this model and whatever this model does and give that usefulness to the users so that it can become a product? That's the real challenge. So when you think about building an end-to-end machine learning system, you have to address a lot of questions. So some of them are, how does the data come in? Right? You don't always have a data set. When you build a product, you probably have pipelines for data to come in. It can be streaming or it can be in batches. So we are streaming data from the users. That's what we call ingestion. The next question: how does this data pre-processed? So you probably have to do some processing onto this data before you give it to the machine learning model. So that's something you have to consider. Next is, how do you validate the data before training? That's an important question. So when data comes in, it can come in any forms. So when you, for example, think about, say you have a feature that is the age of this user. So what if this age happens to be negative? That's not possible, and you should have your model, before you give this data to the model, you should be able to filter this out and see if there are any anomalies. You should also think about, how do you manage the infrastructure to serve the model. So Paras was talking about a lot of cloud options where all the infrastructure is maintained by these cloud providers. So you only care about building the algorithm, and Google or AWS, they take care of scaling and all that. But a lot of times you will have to deploy this model on your own servers on premise. And so you will have to take care of how this infrastructure is maintained and how you scale up in a lot of ways. Finally, you also have to think about monitoring. So once this model is in production and users are using it, how do you find out what the performance of this model is when people are actually using it. Is it performing well? Are users happy with what the machine learning model predicts and the inference of the model? That's something you have to consider. So I'm not saying that machine learning code itself, so this process of building the ML model is not important. It definitely is. But to actually serve it to users, that is what majority of the efforts go in. So a lot of data scientists, they start with the thought that their efforts are going to be in terms of building the model. But it turns out that 80 to 90% of their time they actually spend on all these other things other than building ML model. So definitely taking machine learning models to production is challenging. So models need to be trained and deployed every time the code changes or whenever there's new data. So there's definitely some kind of automation required uh, to, to make this process of taking ML models to production easier. More and more organizations are starting to realize this. So ML ops wasn't popular back then, but now that we are starting to productionize ML models, this is becoming more popular. And that's what we'll be seeing today. Once you do have an ML model, how do you operationalize the ML system? So I've been saying again and again how do we productionize ML model? So what does this production mean? I'd love to hear what your definition is, and then I'll share mine probably. So do share that in the chat section. What do you think productionizing ML models or just going to production means? So if any of you have been interning or have been working at any firms with respect to software development, you probably know this term. Making it available to users, okay? Serving to end users, okay? Yeah, so I think that kind of sums it up. So my definition would be to transitioning from development, so developing a product, to delivering it to the product to the end users. So that is what we call going to production. Making ML practical, okay. So it doesn't matter whether it's a web application, mobile application, or is it a software for an embedded system. So whenever you deliver it to the users, you go from this stage of developing to delivering to the users. That's what we call productionizing. So we emphasize on the stage development, staging, production, because often this environment is very different. So when you think about your development environment, you're in machine learning, you're probably working on Jupyter notebooks and on your personal workstation. And when you actually deploy it, it's completely different. It's on the cloud, or you're not probably running a Jupyter notebook per se. It's probably a pipeline. And so there's a lot of difference between your development environment and your production environment, right? So that's why we are emphasizing on these stages. There's certainly a lot of difference in terms of the compute power available at each of these stages, the kind of resources and the kind of dependencies installed, the software dependencies. All these are very different. And that's why we talk about these stages again and again. To explain why we need machine learning operations, ML ops, I'm just going to draw an analogy from software development. It's the closest thing to ML development, right? So in software development, we probably have, in the most generic sense, we have two teams. One is the development team and the operations team, right? So they take care of everything from developing to giving it to the users. So the development team, they start, so they usually involve software engineers, developers, and these are the people who build the product. And the operations team, they usually involve system admins and people in that area field. And what they do is they take care of releases and monitoring the production environment if there's any errors, maintaining high uptime, things like that. So there are a lot of friction between these two teams. So if you look at the development team, they don't know what's going on in production, right? So once they do develop it and give it to the operations team to deploy, they don't know how users are actually using it. And so that is a challenge with the development team. And for the operations team, the infrastructure keeps growing when you scale your product, right? As more and more users start using it, you need to scale your infrastructure as well. And so if you don't have any kind of automation, it becomes more and more difficult to manage this infrastructure. You cannot keep maintaining and installing new releases onto each of these servers when you have more servers. Also, the time to bring new releases to production increases. So any business, they see business value in bringing a new release into market faster than any other business, right? So being able to push a release into production quickly is very important for any business. And so that is also very hard when the application grows. And finally, monitoring errors and all this also becomes hard when you have a big infrastructure. So that is where DevOps comes in. It's a very popular term right now, and it's all about bringing development and operations team together. So you kind of help them collaborate, and you do this by three things. One is you automate the infrastructure itself. So what I mean by that is we have something called infrastructure as code. So you just mention the infrastructure that you need in code. Say you need a server with this much compute and this much RAM and this much storage, and you want a load balancer that is connected to this. So whatever infrastructure you need, you just mention it in code, and then the second you push it, all these cloud providers, they automatically allocate all these resources to you. So you don't have to have a system admin go to this console and take care of all this and spend a lot of time. So it's very replicatable. Once you have an infrastructure set up, you can replicate it as many times as you need. The second is automating workflows. So CI/CDs, continuous integration, continuous deployment. So they help automate this whole process of deploying this product to the market. Uh, so all you have to do is when you push something to your repository, push changes to your repository and it's approved. So everything from testing this product against a lot of test cases, doing security checks on this product, and then finally deploying it on the server. Everything is automated. It's taken care of by your system on the cloud or on-premise. And finally, you also need some kind of monitoring system to see how your application is performing, and that's also taken care of by DevOps. Now that I've talked about software engineering and how DevOps helps solve a lot of problems there, I'll draw your attention to a similar pattern in machine learning products as well. So just like you build software products, building machine learning product also involves a lot of development and involves both the development and operations team. So here, while in software engineering, we only talk about code, right? So that's what we've been deploying, and that's the commodity. But in machine learning, it's both. It's all data, code, and models. So all these need to be deployed. So there's a lot of difference between both. So in machine learning as well, we have these two teams. One is the ML engineers and data scientists. These are the people who actually build the model. And then there's the development team involving software engineers and machine learning engineers. So these people take care of deploying your ML model to the users, right? So the operations team, they again have a lot of these challenges that we've been talking about that software engineers face, right, when it comes to deploying the product. So if these two teams are working and they don't have any kind of automation, this is what the process looks like. This is a manual process. So if you look at this diagram, in the left half of the dotted line, we have the machine learning aspects of the product. And in the right, we have the operations aspect of it. Again, in the upper half of this dotted line, you have all the experimentation going on, right? The data scientist comes and experiments, they try to find the best model, all that. And in the lower half, you see whatever is in production. So I'll quickly explain this pipeline. So try to remember this manual process, because once I explain all the challenges in this manual process, I'll talk about the automated one. So then you can kind of compare both these processes. So this manual process starts with data extraction. It could be from multiple sources, and what you do is analyze these data sets and you bring it to a form that is usable, right? And next, what you do is you start manually experimenting. So the data scientists and ML researchers, they come in and they try to find the best model architecture, the best parameters for the model, so that this model gives out the best performance metrics. Once you do have a good model, what you do is you push it to a model registry. So this is store of models. So all this version control happens there. And so now what happens is the model that is generated every time is stored in this registry, so that the operations team can then take it and deploy to users. So when the operations teams come in, they can look at these models generated and they can serve it to the users. It can be through a RESTful API, it can be as a service in a microservice architecture, whatever. So I'll just take you through a few challenges that is faced if you take machine learning to production, if you don't have any kind of automation. So one challenge is experimenting in teams. So say a team of data scientists and machine learning researchers, they're working together on, they're experimenting on different model architectures on a data set, right? And their goal is to maximize the performance of the model. So they want the best accuracy, they want the least loss. And so they're doing a lot of different things independently and they're trying to find that best model. So the challenge is how do you make sure that two data scientists or ML researchers in the same team don't do the same experiments again and again. So they might not be in sync with what each other are doing. So they might repeat the experiment. How do you keep track of the performance metrics that individual experimenters are getting, right? And finally, how do you recreate an experiment? Say you did an experiment early on, and then later on you found out that that was the best experiment that gave the best model. So how do you go back there? So clearly there needs to be a solution to this, right? So one solution is one of the tools that solve this problem is MLflow. So MLflow is a whole suite of software that kind of solves a lot of these problems that we face in productionizing ML. So MLflow has this subproduct called MLflow tracking. So that's what we are talking about right now. So this is what the interface looks like. And so they have APIs in Python and all these popular ML frameworks. And what it does is it kind of keeps track of all the parameters that go into the model as well as the results of the model. So when you start experimenting, things like the learning rate and all the other parameters that go into the model, the hyperparameters, they are recorded. And once you do train the model, the final outcome of the model, the accuracy, the loss, and all these metrics are recorded as well. So now what happens is all the data scientists and researchers in the team are in sync with each other about what each other are doing. And they also always know which model is performing the best. The second challenge is data versioning. So when your data set is frequently evolving, so it's in production, so data is continuously coming in from the users. So you should be able to at least tell which version of the data set was used in training a given version of the model, right? So you should be able to collaborate with each other data scientists in your team and share not just the ML code, but also the version of your data set that was used in training a specific model, right? So that is what data versioning allows you to do. So you're probably already familiar with Git and all these software. These are source control or version control softwares. So what they do is they help you help the whole team know which version each team is working on and try to collaborate without having to send each other emails and stuff. So that's a great solution that solves the same problem in software development. But how do you maintain, do the same things, but with data sets? It turns out that Git and SVN are not a great solution for this. So if you look at Git, how Git and SVN works, they're not really made for large files like how your data sets are. And when you talk about connecting into a remote repository like GitHub, they always have these file limits, file size limits. So you cannot upload your entire data set there. So you definitely need a solution for this. And one of the solutions for data versioning that is very popular right now is called DBC. So you can go to dbc.org and that tells you a lot about this. And what it does is it helps you maintain your data set just like how you maintain different versions of your code. And you can also connect it to blob storage services that cloud providers give. For example, AWS has S3 and Google Cloud Storage has, GCP has Google Cloud Storage. Azure also has a blob storage service. So instead of connecting to a remote repository, you connect to a remote blob storage service like these. And so every time you make a change, they're uploaded to the cloud. So your entire data scientist team can be in sync with the version of the data set that you're working on. So look at the command line interface for this DBC. It's very familiar. You will find it very familiar. It's similar to Git. So all the commands init and status, add, commit, all these are very similar. You'll also notice that DBC allows you to add, so in this example, they're adding S3 storage bucket as a remote storage medium, just like how you would add a GitHub repository. So the third challenge is validating data. So this is what we talked about earlier. What this does is, so as data comes in, so when your model is in production, you're continuously getting data from the users. So you should be able to validate what data is coming in. You can, if there is a problem with one of the data points or a group of data points, say for example, there is this age feature in the data set and a lot of data points that are coming in because of a software bug in your system, it happens to be a negative number. So this is going to definitely reduce the performance of your model, right? Because it's a skewed value and it doesn't quite reflect the real world values that you're going to get once that bug is fixed. So your model, before this data reaches your model, you should be able to filter this out and make sure that these kind of data points that don't quite reflect the real values don't come in, right? So you need to enforce some kind of rules on each of these features. So that's where validating data comes in. And there are a lot of tools, both by Google, Amazon, all these companies, open source tools that help you do this. So the gist of the solution is you basically define a schema for each of these features. So you basically give rules for each of these features about what the acceptable values are. Could be a range, it could be a number of allowable values. And so what it does is every time new data comes in, it first goes through this layer of validation. And only if it satisfies this rule does it come into the model. The fourth challenge is automating pre-processing. So if you think about how data scientists usually work, they love using Jupyter notebooks, right? It's great for experimentation. So you can kind of run any Python code and you immediately see the results and it's wonderful. So when you're writing ML algorithms, you often data as it is, there could be a lot of changes from the data set. So what you do is you basically write code in your Jupyter notebook to change those values. So you do a lot of pre-processing. So this pre-processing can be anything from scaling the data, it can be normalizing it, one-hot encoding it. You're probably familiar with all these terms if you are a data scientist. So I'll give you an example. If it's image classification, you probably have pixel values from 0 to 255, right? So that's how RGB values work. So you probably need to normalize this when you're working on deep learning. There is this habit of normalizing this data because it's from 0 to 255 and you want it from -1 to 1. So this is what an example for a pre-processing step that you need before you actually give the data to the model. So being a data scientist, you probably write this code in your Jupyter notebook and that's enough for experimentation. But what if you want to take this model to production? You can use this Jupyter notebook as it is, right? So what you need is a data processing pipeline, and they should do things like they should be of low latency, which means you should be able to parallelize most of these pre-processing steps so that it can be completed soon. It should be scalable so that as more and more data comes in streaming, you should be able to scale the infrastructure that is handling this pre-processing. You should also be able to version these pre-processing steps. So when you make a modification to the pre-processing step, it should still be up till the next version is online. And finally, you should be able to monitor this so that you can see how this pre-processing is happening live while data is coming. So there's a number of solutions for this. Two open source solutions is Stitch and Apache Airflow. So both of these, they're open source, and what they do is they help you define ELT pipelines. ELT means extract, transform, load. It's a data engineering term, and so what you do is you define pipelines, just like how what you wrote in your Jupyter notebook. You define pipelines with steps as to what this data has to go through before it goes to the model. There's a lot of proprietary solutions as well. If you look at Google Cloud, they have something called Data Prep, so that allows you to do the same thing, but they take care of all the infrastructure and scaling, so you don't have to worry about it. The fifth challenge is versioning model. So we discussed about versioning dataset earlier. So we use something like DBC and we maintain multiple versions of the datasets so that they can share it with the team. But what about the model itself? You should be able to if you have to successfully operationalize machine learning systems, the system should be able, so the system is going to continuously collect data, right? So when you have continuous training enabled, what happens is as data comes in or as any change in the ML code happens, immediately the training automatically starts on the cloud. So this means that there's going to be a new version of model every week or every month or whatever frequency you usually set. Uh, so this means that there are going to be multiple versions of the model. So clearly there needs to be a tool to manage the versions of model as well. So the reasons are that one is you need to find the best model. So this happens during experimentation. Say you're experimenting and you keep coming up with new models, right? Each data scientist in the team, they come up with new models. So since this is an iterative process, you need to keep track of the performance that each model is giving out and have a copy of this model as well. So when you figure out later that this is the best model, you should be able to go back to it. Next is failure tolerance. So say your ML system is in production, you should be able to say there's a new version of the model and it doesn't perform quite well. So you should be able to roll back to the previous version that you know is performing well, right? So you need to keep copy of all these versions that go into production so that you can roll back whenever you need. You also need gradual stage deployment. So what I mean by that is that, so if you're into UI and all this, you're probably familiar with the term A/B testing. So what you do is instead of rolling out a change to all the users, you roll out a change to some of the users and see how the user is reacting to the change. And once you're happy with the change, if the user is found to be happy with the change, then you can start rolling out the same change to all the users. So there's a lot of reduction of risk in this model. So you can do the same thing with ML models as well. So you can probably have groups of users and then roll out a new model to those users only. And when you monitor and find that these users are happy with the performance of the model, then you can deploy this model to all the users. So that's where gradual stage deployments come in. And the final challenge is validating the model itself. So unlike in software where you only need to test the code, in machine learning you need to test the performance of the model as well. So when I say performance, I mean the metrics such as the latency of the model. So you say it's your project is a self-driving project, right? So you have a lot of live users and you want to push a change to the model to all these cars. So since this is a critical system, self-driving, so you need to make sure that your model is able to make inferences within a few milliseconds. And if it's above that, you shouldn't push it to the into production. So that's why you need to validate models. So before that, after the CI/CD stage, you should be able to validate the performance of the model and have some kind of threshold that decides whether the model goes into production or not. So this is the automatic process that I was talking about. Earlier, we looked at the manual process of deploying ML models to production, right? So this is what that process looks like. You start with experimentation, which is critical to machine learning, and it's a iterative process. So all these data scientists, they try to do things again and again. But when you automate things, this experimentation is much more orchestrated using tools that I was talking to you about, like MLflow. So all the data scientists and all the other team members are in sync with each other. So this process has a lot of characters. So one could be rapid experiment. That's what it allows. So using CD continuous deployment, it allows you to quickly iterate. Whenever you think of a new hypothesis, you can quickly try to deploy that to a few users. Once you're happy with it, you can deploy to all the users. You can also have continuous training. So as you make any change to the ML code or when new data comes in, you can automatically trigger deployment in the cloud so that the model is trained with the new data and deployed to the users as well. You also need a unified development and product environment. So whenever you build any pipeline on your Jupyter notebooks, you should be able to translate it directly into a production pipeline, so you don't have to rework all the efforts that you put in. Finally, you need some kind of a feedback loop, right? So when you serve your model to the users and they start making predictions, you should be able to tell how that prediction actually helped the user, and if it did not, has to come back to the ML system, and so you should have this feedback loop. So to give you an example, say Netflix, what they do is they use machine learning to recommend you better TV shows, right? Shows that you probably will watch. So they can probably have this feedback loop where once they do recommend a few shows to you, they can monitor if you do watch that show or not, and that will tell the model whether it was a good prediction or not. So those are few characteristics of automatic process. And this is the same automatic process in a different this is a different representation of that same process. So the workflow goes like this: you start with the development and experiment. So the outcome of that is going to be the source code, right? Then what you do is you have continuous integration where you bring that source code and then you have to package it. So if you're using Docker, say, then you can probably package it into a Docker container. Next, you'll have to use continuous deployment to push it to a registry, Docker registry. And of course, you'll have to trigger a continuous training loop so that whenever there's a change in this code, you start training in the cloud. When you do have the training model, you push it to a model registry as well, and then you serve it to users. And as I told you, there's a feedback loop from the prediction service to monitoring and back to the continuous training. So that's all about machine learning operations for today. I hope you guys liked it, and I think now we'll spend some time on Q&A if we have time. Hitesh, you can probably share the, I think you already shared the form. So if you have any questions, you can share it in the chat itself.